Today is the 21st of July, 2025. It's Monday, and my name is Maria Luisa Ornelas June, and I'm interviewing Stephanie Elizondo Griest for the Oral History Project as part of the Macondo Writers Workshop Oral History Project. We're on the campus of Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and it is the summer gathering of the Macondo Writers Workshop. Thank you, Stephanie, for agreeing to this interview. This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed in the Nettie Benson Library Archives and Special Collections at the University of Texas in Austin. Please know that if there is anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. Also, if you need to stop and use the facilities, please let us know. If there are topics that you wish to discuss and I haven't asked about it, please do bring them. Okay, let's get started with your growing up in Corpus Christi.
Okay.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood and your family?
Yes. So my family life was really shaped by a few factors. On my mother's side, we were queñeños, which is we descended from about 100 years of vaqueros on the King Ranch of South Texas. I'm probably going to get the number wrong. My great, I think. It's in my book, All the Ancients and Saints, where I was very careful to articulate it. I just don't remember. But grandfather lived in Gruillas, Mexico. And he was invited by Richard King in probably the 1860s, 1870s to come up and work on the biggest cattle empire the world had ever known, which was the King Ranch, which at that time was bigger than Rhode Island, bigger than Dubai, 850,000 acres. And or that's what it became. That's what the ranch ultimately became. So he was part of the big entrada that walked all the way up and worked on the King Ranch. And so growing up, all of my family, on my mother's side of the family, all lived there in these little yellow brick ranch houses on the King Ranch in the Laureles division. So that was a really beautiful aspect of my early life, was going to the King Ranch. We would go there, especially on Easter, and there'd be piñata and, beautiful barbacoa and pan de campo, and we had cascarones, and, just really like my happy childhood memories are from the King Ranch. And then and the other aspect of my life was my father. My father grew up in Minneapolis, Kansas, and when he was about 3 years old, his mother put a wooden spoon in his hand, and he just went to town pounding on pots and pans. And turned out he really had a keen sense of rhythm. She eventually bought him a little drum, and by the time he was in elementary school, he was leading the high school band. Like, he was an unbelievably preternaturally talented drummer. And so as soon as he graduated high school, he became a member of the U.S. Navy Jazz Band and drummed his way all around the world. So when I was a little girl, I had these two really interesting sides of my personal family history of, one group that really worked the land and had been in place for 100 years, although they were, certainly moving a lot on the range because the King Ranch was such a massive space. On the other hand, my dad used to take the globe down and spin it, and wherever his thumb would land, he would tell me a story about Japan, Morocco, Newfoundland. He just played all over the world. And so Wanderlust really infiltrated my bones at a very, very young age. And I was so lucky that every summer we would pack up the van and jet off, just drive all around the country. We took these incredible family vacations to national parks. And so Wanderlust really was instilled at a very early age. That's probably the origins of me being a travel writer, was from these really early memories. So family life, I would say those are the two really big factors. Yeah.
What did your mom do that you could take off in the summer?
Yeah, my mother worked at IBM. And so she would save all of her vacation time. And my dad was a drum. By the time I came along, he did gig all around town, but it was fairly easy for him to take some time off. Yeah. And so very lucky with that.
So are there stories that you can recall from your childhood that just stand out?
Yeah. Yes. So one event that happened that I have since written about quite a bit, but I think is an important story to to so many aspects of my life happened when I was again, in my books, I write the correct grade. It's just not coming to me. I think third grade though. And our teacher decided that there were too many of us in the classroom. This is at Yeager Elementary School in Corpus Christi, Texas. I actually just lived like a couple blocks away. She decided there were too many of us in the classroom and we needed to be split into two. And so one by one, she began separating us, and all the brown kids went to one side of the room and all the white kids went on to the other side of the room. And I realized as this was happening that I didn't know where I belonged. And so she got to me, and as I remember, I was the last person, and she just like looked down at me over the rims of her glasses and was like, "What are you, Stephanie? Are you Hispanic or are you white?" And that was the first time I realized that that something could happen to me based on how I aligned myself. And I looked over at the white kids and saw who was there and didn't necessarily feel like a kinship with that particular group. But I looked over the brown kids and my best friend, Melida, was there. And so I was like, I'm brown, like I'm Hispanic. And I ran over and I joined that group. And then we were taken to a different room. And a new teacher we'd never met before was there. Again, this is just as I remember, a little kid memory. So I'm sure there are details incorrect. But one thing I distinctly bodily remember is that she had us read. And she sent a book around for us to read from. And listening to my peers, I realized that I had chosen the wrong room because they all spoke Spanish in their home. And so they were bringing sort of pronunciation into this English text. And I began feeling like I'm in the wrong room. I chose incorrectly. And when I got the book, I only spoke English at home. So I used my English accent to read this text. And the teacher kind of looked at me curiously. And when it was over, I went up and I said, I want to be in the other room. I want to be with the other kids. And she actually said, okay. And that ended up being a really important decision because the kids in the brown kid class became, I think, an ESL class. And I never saw those students again in other classes. And the white kids all went on to take like the AP classes and went on to college. And so it turned out to be a really important decision that I made in that moment to go to the white kid room. But it then just made me very confused as to then do I need to do everything through the lens of the white world, right? So that was, I think, a struggle in my earlier childhood. And then when I was in high school, I got asked that question again. And I was asked this, I went to Carroll High School. And by that point, I was very involved in my high school. I was editor of the yearbook, and I was in Tigerettes, and I did all the things. And I was profoundly ambitious. I deeply wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to go to UT, Austin. I was very clear on that, not because of football, but because of the trees. We once went to, I once went on some like class trip, and we went to Austin. It was my first time going to Austin, and I was blown away by the magnificence of the trees. And I just thought, like, that just seemed like the most romantic thing I could possibly do, is sit under a tree and read a book. So that was my goal for college. And so I was, applying for every scholarship I could find in the little scholarship bin in the guidance counselor's office. And my guidance counselor, again, just out of total compassion for me, sat me down because I was just there. I was there more than any other student. I was like, always like, have you gotten any new scholarships I can apply for? Anyway, so she took me aside one day and she's like, Stephanie, she's like, what are you, Stephanie? Are you Hispanic or are you white? And before I could answer, she said, your SAT scores are not high enough if you are white to get these scholarships. But if you are Hispanic, they are. So she let me know there was this distinction in the SATs. Again, this is just my memory, right? Because on my transcript, it turned out every year I'd been answering it differently because I never knew what to put. It's like the option is a W or an H. And so I guess she had noticed the inconsistency because I didn't really know what to put. And so So she wanted to help me. So she literally got a bottle of whiteout and she whited out the W and put an H. And that enabled me to apply to a whole other realm of scholarships. And I got a lot of them. And I arrived to UT Austin so excited. Not only was I getting to go to my dream school so I could sit under the trees and read books, but I could do this for free. So I was like, I felt amazing. I was so excited about this until I started taking my classes and began meeting other students who had the same scholarships and realizing the incredible difference in our lives. And, some of these students had come from migrant families, and some of them had actually been out in the fields themselves. They all told these really harrowing stories, being the only brown student in their class, and they had really borne the hardships of their skin color. And I realized I had not. And that gave me a sense of guilt that was really one of the very dominant factors in my life, I think. Feeling like I had gained something that I didn't earn or deserve, and possibly even took something away from someone else. And when I realized that, I asked my mother, should I give back the scholarship? What should I do? Like, I don't think I deserve this. In particular, I was given I think it was called the Texas Achievement Award. So that was for Mexican-American students at UT Austin. And it was, I think, it was a sizable amount of money. I mean, I was supplemented with other things, but it was like the major dominant scholarship. And so I felt like I don't deserve this scholarship. Anyway, my mom was like, what? Yes, you do. I deserve that scholarship. It's about time something good happens to our family for being Mexican, And so of all of the terrible things that happened to our family, all of this, discrimination, all of the hell that all of the lineage had gone through, finally, it was time for someone to be the beneficiary of that. That is my mother's viewpoint. And certainly I didn't want to give away this, but what I decided instead was if I'm going to accept this, then I need to do things for my community. And so that is where the seed of Chicano activism was seeded inside of me, planted inside of me. And I was so lucky to be at UT Austin for so many reasons. In addition to the fabulous trees, I was able to take all these classes that were absolutely fundamental to my development as a young Chicana. I took a class called Chicano Politics. The class I really remember was the history of Mexican Americans in Texas. That was taught by Dr. Foley. That just opened up every portal inside of me to really be open to learning more about our history. And then realizing I wanted to write from that history. And I wanted to write about us and these lineages. So I would say, as far as big things that happened, formative things that happened in my childhood, that question, what are you, is a big one for me. and feeling the need to give back. I feel like I still am in debt for the scholarships that I received. And in fact, in case we don't get to it later on, I do want to say, as a little sweet, very meaningful end note, when I turned 50 last year, I did a fundraiser to start what I call Testimonios Fronterizos, and it is an endowed grant at UT Austin Journalism School, which is where I graduated from, and it's for young writers from the border who write about the border. Yeah. And it's $25,000, which is the amount that I received back in the day. Granted, there has been, inflation, and it's not quite as worth as much, but my plan is to continue raising money for it and will my estate to it as well. Yeah. So that is a happy ending to that.
Could you describe your community and your city growing up?
Okay, my community and my city growing up. Yes. So Corpus Christi is a very complicated city. It is, I don't actually know the percentages today, but growing up, it seemed to be kind of half and half, half Mexican, half white. And However, all of the political leaders at the time when I was growing up were white. And the people of power seemed to be all white. Again, this is just childhood vantage point of it all. One of the tragedies of Corpus Christi is that we are surrounded by petrochemical industries, Citgo, Valero, and Flint Hills. And in the I write about this quite extensively in my book, All the Agents and Saints, which is about comparing the life of Texas Mexicans with Mohawk Indians who are bisected by the Canadian and New York border, whereas we're obviously bisected by the U.S.-Mexico border. So I write about this a lot there. The correct answer is there. I don't remember exactly the date of this, but there was a city council meeting, I think in the 1930s. I have the correct date in the book, where this, or maybe it was the 50s. Anyway, there was a date. I can pinpoint it on my book, but it's just not with me. There was literally a city council meeting, and the title, the focus of the committee meeting was what to do with the Negroes. Yeah, that was literally the title of it. And the answer was to move them to where they were beginning to build these petrochemical industries. So there is now a serious cancer cluster among the African-American community that was moved to live by these industries. So I actually read a lot about that in my book, All the Agents and Saints. There's a lot of cancer in this community. Corpus Christi was also named the America's Fattest City by, I think, again, this is also in All the Agents and Saints. I think it was Men's Journal, but some major male magazine called us the fattest city in America, like in 2014 or something like that. Those factors are really painful and quite evident just walking around Corpus Christi. You can see it's a city of ill health. I remember there's actually a church that is, there's the freeway when you're leaving Corpus Christi going to San Antonio, right when all the petrochemical industries start. There's the church that's right in the center of it, and then you see so it's quite a dramatic background, right? So it's like you have, speeding traffic, a beautiful church with a blue dome and stars. Maybe you've seen it before. And then behind is, this very terrifying landscape of all petrochemical industries. I went and interviewed them when I was working on my book, All the Agents and Saints, these young monks that were there. And they told me that they're like, oh yeah, there's just this, they call it Corpus Christi crud, and you get it when you arrive, and all of these monks got these upper respiratory bronchial infections from all the pollution. They're not allowed to plant. That's a big part of being a monk, right? You plant and you grow food. They couldn't do that, even though they lived on all this land, but they can't actually eat anything that they grow because the soil is toxic. So it's like the air is toxic, the soil is toxic, the water and the fishing channels out there. You're also not supposed to fish out there. Yeah, it's Corpus Christi has a lot of problems. That said, I love it. I'm also very devoted to my hometown. And somehow we all still love it. So I am very proud. I'm proud to be from Corpus Christi. We are the hometown of Selena. A lot of beautiful things have come from Corpus Christi. Yes, I just wish we had a more functional and kinder governance.
What did you major in at UT Austin?
I majored in post-Soviet East European studies. What? How did that happen? Okay, so I'll tell you how that happened. That and journalism. So I got 2 bachelor's degrees concurrently. And how that happened, so I guess the next big thing that happened in my childhood, or actually right about before I left Corpus Christi. So one day, I was the editor of the yearbook, which I think is how this invitation came to me. But somehow I got an invitation to the, I think it was called the Press Club's High School Journalism Convention. And it was the first time in my life I had a premonition. And the premonition was, I opened up this, very decorative envelope. And, it was an invitation to this conference. And I remember the Reverend Jesse Jackson was going to be speaking, editors from Time Magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times, Washington Post, like all these. And I was very interested in journalism. I wanted to be a writer. And at that time, I didn't know there was any my childhood understanding of being a writer is you were a journalist. Like, I thought that people that wrote books was some other species not accessible to me. But what seemed like, and the realm of the possible was to be a journalist for a newspaper. So that's what I was feeling like I would study. Anyway, so at the bottom of this invitation was the price, and I think it was like $500. Plus you had to get yourself to DC. So it was just this thing that sort of like impulsively like tossed to the side. Like, I don't have $500. My family doesn't have $500. Like, I can't go to this conference. But then the premonition happened. Maybe like a week or two later, I pulled up in my drawer and I'd like kind of shoved it in the drawer. And I saw it, and the deadline was like a week away. And the premonition was just like, I felt it in my body. I just had this like, almost like a voice was like, you must go to this. And it was really trippy because I had never had that experience, like something so strong saying you need to go to this conference. And I was like, all right. So I went to my mom, like, Mom, look at this. And she's like, well, I've got frequent flyer miles. So what I expected her to say was no. But she said, I've got frequent flyer miles. If you can raise the money, you can go. And I was like, oh, well, who's going to give me $500? So then I was working at the Gap. So I put on my like most formal little Gap outfit and I typed up my first resume. And I went to the Corpus Christi Press Club. They gave me like $100, $200. My high school literary magazine gave me, I got a couple $100, but I still needed like another $200 or $300. And then I went to the law offices of the Bonilla brothers. This is one reason why I love Corpus Christi. I went to the Bonilla brothers, and they were, kind of like a well-known law office, all Latinos, all brothers. And I started at one end, and by the time I was done, the last brother just like had the check ready for me as I walked in. And they gave me more than enough to go. Amazing. These are the reasons why people love Corpus Christi, right? Like the generosity of people there. So I get in my first plane. I'd never flown before. I'm so excited. And I get to this conference. There's like 500 journalists, young journalists, all, editors of the yearbook and newspaper from all across America. And I'm just like radiating energy. I'm so open to receive a message. And I'm like, something's going to happen to me. Something's going to happen to me. And the very first night I did, the keynote address was given by Charles Beerbeyer, who was a political correspondent for CNN. And this man, I had watched him as a kid. He was the person who narrated the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, riots, revolution, coup d'etat. And the entire time I'm like, that man's job will get me out of Texas, right? Like I wanted, because I had all this wanderlust. I can go see the world through this man, what this man's doing. So when he was done with this oratory, it was like the most riveting lecture of my life. To this day, like no one has ever excited me as much as this man, the CNN correspondent. So when he was done, he's like, who's got a question for me? And I raised my hand and I ran to the front of the room to the mic and I'm like, I want to be you. What do I do? And he looked at me and he said, learn Russian. Next question. And I was like, gay? How could I possibly learn a language like Russian? I hadn't even learned Spanish yet, I couldn't even talk to my abuelita. But being all of like 17 years old, I was old enough to recognize it's not very often in life that you get such specific advice. So learn Russian. It's very hard advice, but it's very specific. So when I went off to UT Austin, I enrolled in Russian. And I studied for 4 years. And then I graduated in UT in 5 years. So my first senior year at UT, I jetted off to Moscow. Yeah. And that is what started my life as a travel writer. Yeah. And that's why I have the very strange major. At that time, it was called Post-Soviet East European Studies. I shouldn't say strange, unusual. But I'm so profoundly grateful that I studied Russian because everything I needed to learn as a travel writer, as a journalist, and increasingly as a human, I learned in Moscow in 1996.
Let's take a quick pause.
Yeah.
I hear some weird audio in the background, so.
Yeah, there is. It's like,
So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Am I talking too fast? I tend to talk too
Nope,
fast.
you're
No, is
doing
that okay?
great.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Levels and everything are great.
Mm.
You're doing good.
yeah, maybe the submarine is going underwater right now. I don't know. I'm thinking about Hunt for Red October. I don't know why.
I was gonna say I heard it like right when we were getting ready to start, and it wasn't very long. So I should briefly go. Okay, yeah, now I just hear the AC. We should be good to continue.
Okay, excellent.
I need to follow up with some of these comments that you just made, like what you learned in Moscow.
Oh.
Let's put a pin on it, just
Okay.
very quickly.
Yeah.
And just when did you discover that you had a love of writing?
Okay. So the same woman who intuited that my dad was a drummer, her name was Madge Griest. And she lived all of her life in tiny, tiny, tiny towns in Kansas. Ada, Kansas, which I think had a population of like 70, and Minneapolis, Kansas, which is where I met her. And I really loved this grandmother. And so I loved her so much. We would visit her every summer. My dad and I would get in the van and drive up, just the two of us. And I loved her so much that I missed her deeply. And so I would write her letters. And I had a lot of compassion for my grandmother because she lived with her husband, my grandfather, who scared me a bit as a kid. And I feel scared is maybe not the right word, but he, I really, as an adult, have a lot more compassion for him that I maybe didn't as a child. But from my childhood vantage point, he had been shot in the foot when he was a kid. I think he was cleaning out his friend's gun, I think his friend shot him accidentally. It was an accident, but anyway, it resulted in him having such a limp that. The good thing about it was he didn't have to go to the war. The bad thing was, by the time I met him, he was really very limited in movement and basically spent all day in the basement of the house. And so would only come upstairs at 12 and at 5 for lunch and for dinner. And he would literally, at the bottom of the stairs, he would shout up, "Ready, woman!" And then he would, climb up the stairs. And it was such a pound that like all the cupboard would like shake and so for me as a little girl, like that was scary. And he would come in and he would, I don't know how, this man really had a metabolism like you would not believe. He would just eat a mountain of mashed potatoes and chicken fried steak and and my grandmother, who was very conscious about her weight, would be standing by the sink with cottage cheese and just eating cottage cheese. Yeah. And so that was very impressionable to me. And I think it gave me a lifelong fear of marriage, domesticity, and cottage cheese. So I started writing her letters. And I wrote her letters as a kid, and because I loved her and I missed her. But one day, she revealed that she had been keeping all of these letters that I had been writing her. And she pulled them out of the armoire to show me. And I just couldn't believe it. First of all, I couldn't believe how many I'd written her. Like it was like a big fat stack. And then I couldn't believe she'd kept them. And I was like, "Why do you have them?" And she said, "Because they keep me company." And that really touched me because I was worried she was lonely. And so then I'm like, if my letter is keeping, then I overtook its importance. I was like, all right, I am standing between my grandmother, who I love very much, and loneliness. Like, I'm going to write the best damn letter I can. So I took these letters very seriously. And I think that's actually how I began being a writer, because I just started writing these really long, very detailed letters to my grandmother about everything that happened to me of significance from the time I was probably 6 or 7 years old until she died my senior year in high school. So till I was about 17. And, we really had a very meaningful relationship through our letters, beautiful, long, long, long letters. We wrote back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then I went into journalism school. And then I learned that the connectivity that I created with my grandmother, the intimacy that I created, could be done on a larger scale.
So now I'm going to move back to that pin that we put on Moscow.
Okay.
So you studied post-European Russian studies.
Yes, post-Soviet East European studies, yes.
And you were taking some journalism classes, so
Yes.
I assumed that you
Yes, I
were going
had
to
both
go.
degrees going.
And so you knew that you were going to go into journalism.
Yeah, I wanted to be a foreign correspondent in Moscow.
So tell me about Moscow.
Yeah, Moscow in 1996, such a trip. So Well, first of all, I get there in January, so I'd literally never seen snow fall from the sky in my life, and then I arrive in a blizzard, So it was quite an introduction. I didn't even own a pair of mittens prior to Moscow, and suddenly, I have to wear this Michelin Man, outfit and these crazy boots, and it would take me half an hour just to step outside. I mean, it was such a shock, to go there. Yeah, God, so much happened. Good and bad. I mean, some very scary things happened. I was chased by a group of drunk Russian men in a car. So that was definitely the scariest thing. And that happened right away. I'd only been there for a couple of weeks. So very scary things happened. But extraordinary, amazing things happened. And moreover, I really realized I am meant to do this. I am meant to be out chronicling the world. And then, well, I guess the first realization was I am meant to be out exploring the world. I just felt so intensely alive. So that was very thrilling. So the first couple of months, I'm just so thrilled that I'm there. And then I remember really seeing, at first everything was just so shocking and interesting. But once just the sheer joy of seeing so many things that were wildly interesting, I began to really feel the intensity of what Russians were experiencing. So I was there in 1996, which was 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Chechen War was raging, ruble was falling, the mafia had infiltrated every aspect of Russian society. And people were so disillusioned. Democracy was there. This initial taste of democracy was really not helping anyone in any, feasible way. Already Soviet nostalgia had taken hold. So I absolutely understand how Putin later came and capitalized on the nostalgia people felt when there was a system, however profoundly flawed it was, that did provide some basis of stability. Whereas, this supposed democracy they were experiencing by 1996 had resulted in profound instability in their lives. And so then realizing I was coming in as a foreigner attached to a big fancy university back in the United States, I was given a great deal of privilege. There was this one moment where when we actually received stipends from the university to be there. I was studying at the Moscow Linguistics Institute, and so I remember, we had to line up to get our stipends, and there was the foreigners line, and then there was the Russian line, and the Russian line was just 100 people, and these were the professors at the university, the staff, all the faculty, and then the janitorial staff, everyone that worked at the university, all this long line. And then there was just nobody was studying abroad in Russia at that point. So the foreigners line was me and my friends, 5 of us. And so we would go to the front and just the stairs that they would do, that we could walk up to the front of this line, and we'd be given rubles, which we knew at the time. And I think that, we had zero tact when we first arrived. We were hey, we get these rubles, let's go to a concert, that's literally one of the first batches of rubles we got. We're let's go see Sting, because we just see Sting came to play Red Square. Let's go see Sting, and we were so excited, not realizing that this long line of Russians were what? You're gonna go see Sting? And it turned out they gave us more money than they were giving our faculty. And this was the monthly salary of these Russian faculty. And we were let's go to a concert, And so it took me a moment to realize that. And when I did, that's when I began to ask myself, what am I doing here? I shouldn't be here, I absolutely should not be here. This is, I shouldn't be here. So what am I doing taking away resources from a country that is really lacking in resources? So then I just started thinking, well, what could I do? If I am here, what could I do that could be of some value to someone somehow? And then I thought, well, I'm really lacking in basic skill sets. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I do speak Russian, but so does every Russian. So that, nothing makes me unique in that. I'm not a social worker. I was in journalism school. Like all college had prepared me for was to speak Russian. So at least I could speak Russian, but that's not a valuable skill in Russia, because they do as well, right? So, and then I could take notes because I was in journalism school. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna take notes. So that began this practice. Every night I would sit at my cot and I would think, what did I see today? What did I hear today? What did I smell today? What did I touch today? What did I feel today? So it started off just 10 minutes, jotting things down. And then it got more and more intense. Not intense, but like more and more thorough. As time went on, I began writing more and more and more notes. By the end of my time in Moscow, I was writing 2 to 3 hours a day. And I was also beginning, rather than like, initially I would just think, okay, what were those babushki in the metro? What were they saying to each other? And I would write a little note. But then I was like, well, what if I just turned to the babushka and asked her opinion? And then it was like, well, what if I went out and interviewed somebody? So just gradually I began to pick up this skill set. I kind of created a skill set for myself that I then took with me. I've now been to 50 countries, and I'm still doing the same things that I learned how to do on a cot in Russia in 1996. Yeah. So that's what led to my first book, which is called Around the Block, BLOC, My Life in Moscow, Beijing, and Havana. Yeah.
So what did you do after Moscow?
I went to Beijing. Yeah. I went, so immediately after Moscow, I had 1 year left at UT, during which I applied to every grant, scholarship, and fellowship with a plane ticket attached to it. So I applied for the Rhodes, I applied for the Fulbright, I applied for the Marshall, and then on a random errand, I went to the graduates. Like I was working for Daryl Rocha, who was this extraordinary dean of minority affairs. I think that was his title. And he really took in all of the students of color in the college communication. Daryl Rocha, total saint, love Daryl Rocha with all my heart, someone I'm still very close to today, someone I have so much respect for. And so he would, bring us in and give us jobs so that we would have, an income stream. So we didn't have to work, at a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. So grateful to this man. Anyway, so I was just out running errands for him, and I went to the graduate college somehow. Anyway, this is not important. I randomly, but what's important is just how random it was. I was literally just dropping off paper, and I saw this interesting looking flyer that I pulled out. And it was for something I'd never heard of, and it was for the Henry Luce Scholarship. So the Henry Luce Scholarship, every year sends 17 or 18 Americans. At the time, the requirements have since changed, but at the time, it was 18 Americans who were under the age of 30, who were not Asian, who did not speak an Asian language, and had never been to Asia before, and they would send you to Asia for a year. So I applied and I got it, and that is what sent me to China. And I absolutely wanted to go to China because having experienced Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union in their post-communist stage, I always felt like Russians at that time in 1986, they would always say, well, in former times. And I'm like, I want to go where it is happening now. So that's why I wanted to go to Beijing. I wanted to experience communism in real life while it's actually the political system, the governing political system. So that is how I became an editor for the English mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party.
What was the name of it?
It was the English mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, which is called China Daily. Yes, so I did that for a year.
We'll take one quick pause. Okay. So one thing they were telling me right now is your body position.
Okay.
Is perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh, because I started doing this too.
You're good. I just wanted to double check. I asked him, was like, is she all right with taking the No. So, all right. Thank you.
All right.
You're good.
This is going to come out of left field. Are they related to Falun Gong?
You know what? Falun Gong was happening when I was there, and they were just beginning the crackdown on it when I was there. Yes. So I definitely witnessed people doing that style of meditation qigong in alleyways and not alley, but like on even medians and parks. I did see people do that. It wasn't until after I left that I began doing research and realized, like, a lot happened regarding Falun Gong. But yes, that was happening when I was there. Yeah, wild.
Would you describe your writing as literary activism?
That is certainly my attempt and my intention. Yes.
And how would you define it?
How would I define my writing?
Literary activism.
Oh, literary activism. Yes, realizing, well, as our madrina, Sandra Cisneros, said, we do this because the world we live in is a house on fire and the people we love are burning. And I feel that with all of me. And so writing is a way, I see it twofold. David Foster Wallace, who's not a writer I go around quoting, but he said something that has really touched me, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's something along the lines of, what is writing? It's reaching across the canyon of human emptiness and making someone feel less alone in the world. And that really registers with me, because my first impetus to write was because I felt like I was worried my grandmother was lonely. And I was lonely, right? So this is a way of us curing both of our loneliness, was through letters. So writing books I really love because they are a way of bridging this gap of human loneliness. And what I write about is a way of bringing some type of solace to the people I write about. So, and just documenting people who are impacted by oppression.
I'm going to put a pin on that because I was going to ask you about something else.
Okay.
You were describing your mother as being very grounded because of her ancestral history on the King Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
and your father as being the opposite. How was your wanderlust received at home?
Oh, yeah. My dad totally understood. Completely supported. My father was my angel. I'm so lucky to have been raised by someone who really, like, my father never said no. My father only said yes, and how can I help? My entire life. My mom had a harder time with me wanting to go, but we did the best thing possible, which is Moscow. She did not understand why I wanted to go to Moscow. She was literally like, why do you always go to depressing places? Like, why are you wanting to, why can't you go to Paris? Why can't you go to London? To Moscow, it just did not fit her idea of, a good time. And when I got the opportunity, like lifetime opportunity, to go live in Beijing for a year as a Henry Liu scholar, and my mother had never been abroad before besides Mexico and Canada, but she'd never been overseas before. And when I waited, I really wanted her to have that experience. And so I waited until literally my plane was boarding. And then I turned to her and I grabbed her by the, I was like, I'm not getting on this plane until you promise me you're going to come visit. And she just looked at me because she did not want to go. And then my group was called, and I just was not going to get on the plane. And so finally they started calling my name. Is Stephanie Griest here? And my mom was like, okay, I'll come. So I'm so grateful. My relationship with my mother began. My mother is now my best friend. She is also my angel. We are so close. We were not very close when I was growing up, but we were profoundly close now because she came to see me in Beijing. That's where our relationship, as we have it now, really began. That's when she understood me. And it's also when I understood her. Yeah.
Now I'm going to switch it back.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good.
I'm jumping you or jumping around.
It's all good.
But when did you first become aware that that your writing could be literary activism?
Oh, let's see. I mean, definitely with my my book Mexican Enough, where I explore this idea, what it means to be bi-ethnic, what it means to have parents from completely different worlds, what it means to explore the liminal space that runs between families, communities, Corpus Christi, the border. That's definitely like my project that sort of squarely fits into how I perceive literary activism to be. But I was also attempting to do that in my first book as well, Around the Block. And in some of the journalism I did. I mean, I was also a reporter for the New York Times. I was an intern at the New York Times. I was an intern at the Washington Post. I was an intern at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Initially, I wrote about pop culture. Like, my first career goal was to be the editor of Rolling Stone magazine because I wanted to interview Bono. I was a hardcore U2 fan, and that's all I wanted to do. But very quickly realized that is not a worthy career goal when I was at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was my first internship. That was my sophomore year in college. When I actually started interviewing, I went to Seattle, and this was right after Kurt Cobain committed suicide. I arrived like a month later. So that was a major turning point in grunge, but I was like hardcore in the grunge scene. And I began interviewing some of these musicians and realized I do not want to spend my life interviewing at all musicians. So I became very disinterested in the music scene after actually spending the summer doing it. It was from there that I then began thinking more in terms of activism. And probably my Chicano politics classes, I would imagine that is what got me thinking. And also, as I got in my coursework at UT Austin and began reading the work of, all of the Russian exiles, all the exile writers, reading Solzhenitsyn, that also probably is what set me down this path as well. So I think a combination of Chicano literature and Russian literature started me down this path. Yeah.
When did you start seeing yourself as a journalist, that you were doing this? Not that you wanted to be this, but that you were this.
Yeah. Well, that actually happened in Moscow in 1996 when the presidential election between Yeltsin and Zyuganov. That was a major election. Zyuganov being the Communist Party leader, and Yeltsin, of course, being the Democratic Party. I can't remember what his political party was called, but that was a major election, and I wrote about it for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. So that's, I think, when I was kind of squarely doing this. Yeah.
Are there ways that you either practice your writing or engage in activities that keep you as a literary activist?
I feel that I do that with, I feel like for the last 20 years, 25 years, that has been a daily practice for me. That is most of what I write about, it can go into that category. With my books, Around the Block, which all my books ask a question. So my first book, Around the Block, My Life in Moscow, Beijing, and Havana, asks the question, what happens when the ideological premise of your homeland implodes? So really doing kind of oral histories with people who have really been through a lot with the destruction of the ideological foundation of their country. Mexican Enough, I really, the answer to that question, or the question that's being asked by that book is, can you become a member of an ethnic group? Or must you be born and raised in it? Which is my way of trying to come to an understanding of can I claim to be Chicana, even though I didn't grow up speaking Spanish? Or can I become more Mexicana? So that's where I spent all of this time, living, working in Mexico, during which time I wrote about the Zapatistas. And anyway, I don't think I'm answering your question. This is just to say, so all these various book projects that I have done that. And also, since 2013, I've been a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. I teach creative nonfiction, and so this is what I'm also instilling in my students. how to write toward, I literally teach a class. Well, it was initially called Writing Towards Justice, and now I've been asked to change the name of that class. So now it's called Writing as Witness.
What you write seems so natural and ingrained in you, but it also seems really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
What literary part of you is light or silly?
That is a delightful question. I will say that I have always been amazed at the humor of the people that I am writing about. Russians are hilarious, actually. So I was always really blown away by the humor. And actually, humor is 100% survival tactic of that's how people made it through the Soviet Union. All of the terror of the Soviet Union, people survived it through laughter, through very, very, very dark humor, through satire. The Mohawk Nation of Akwesasne that I read about in my book, All the Agents and Saints, also, like, they have been through so much, and it's just extraordinary how often you laugh. Chicanos were very funny too. So I think the humor is the humor of the people that I have interviewed all of this time. I think that has what has enabled them to live through these terrible experiences, and it is also what has kept me from, hopping off a bridge, because it is very, because it is really, really brutal. The stories that I've been told in my writing life. Yeah.
Are there organizations or causes that you contribute to?
You know, I give away a lot of money. Every year I give away just considering how little I make, I give away $5,000 to $7,000 a year. And I give away, and any friend that has any GoFundMe, I give a ton of money to GoFundMe, various GoFundMe accounts. I always give, like, as a just monthly donator. Is this what you're asking me? Like literary contributions?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're asking? Okay, I'm not
literary,
sure.
financial.
Okay, literary, yeah. So, so I always give to the ACLU, both North Carolina and also national. I give to Indian, NDN Collective, which was founded by Nick Tilson, who runs this incredible Native-run organization, philanthropic organization that gives money to Native communities that are fighting for their land back. I give to them. And then more recently, I'm now giving a lot of money to the endowed scholarship that I started at UT Austin, Testimonios Fronterizos. And this year I gave to Macondo. Woo! Yeah.
How do you decide which organizations?
I don't. That's why I give to so many. Yeah.
Has your identity been shaped by what you write, or do you?
Woo! Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I write about questions that haunt me, and I figure myself out through the writing. So that absolutely happened 100% with Mexican Enough. That my big hang up in my life, and still is a big hang up, but I did quell it a bit through this book. So the sort of existential, the question I was asked as a child, right? What are you, Stephanie, Hispanic or white? Really shook me and continued to shake me, because I'm asked that all of the time. I'm not only in like Texas. In Texas, they ask me it, but I've actually never not asked that. Even when I'm in Corpus Christi, people ask me, like, and they're asking me, like, no one believes I'm actually from Corpus Christi. I no longer appear to be from where I'm from. So wherever I am in the world, I'm always asked, what am I? The point is, I have no idea. Yes. So through the writing of Mexican Enough, for that book, I moved to Mexico when I was 30, and I studied Spanish. I took a language school, so I was in language classes 8 or 9 hours a day. And then I began doing interviews. I probably did about 100 interviews. I tend to do about 100 interviews for each book. So I interviewed everyone whose path I crossed for a year, traveling up and down by bus all over Mexico. A lot was happening. This is 2005, 2006. So this was when in Oaxaca, there was the Apo uprising, and the Zapatistas issued a red alert. So I spent a lot of time in Oaxaca and Chiapas. There was also the only gay-owned sex shop in Querétaro. The owner of that was murdered in his store, which really devastated the LGBTQ community in Querétaro. So I did a lot of reporting on that. Anyway, all of this helped me come to my own realization that I am Mexican enough. Although every time I say that, I still feel like, maybe I'm not, I don't know. But hopefully enough. Hopefully at least the 50% that I technically am. Yes. So was that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, your identity,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And then I just published a book called Art Above Everything. And the central question of that book is art enough? And I think that coming from creative nonfiction journalism, we generally, on the literary hierarchy, we're at the absolute bottom. And so much so that I didn't feel like even call myself an artist is something like, am I? So I wrote a book about that as well. Like, what is an artist? Who can declare themselves to be an artist? What does it mean to be an artist? That book is also a search for what I call art monks, which are women who have, like me, renounced everything and live entirely for their creative endeavors. So that's another aspect of my life that I think is maybe worth mentioning is that I really gave up a lot to do these books. These books were no joke. They required everything of me. Because of them, I was never able to really hold down a job. I wasn't able to hold down a relationship. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a 401k. For a long time, I had no cutlery. So my 20s and 30s, I lived totally nomadically and really, 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 it was really a major struggle to be a writer, which is why I ultimately became an academic.
It's like you were reading my mind,
Yeah.
but I didn't know how to ask.
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
impolite question.
I am,
of,
you know what? I am
how
very
did you
open.
afford?
Oh, yeah. How did I afford this? Right, yeah. So how I afforded this is, so a lot of grant scholarships, fellowships. And also for a long time, I didn't actually live anywhere. So all my stuff was in storage and I crashed on people's couches. Yeah. And I also did a lot of artist residencies, which are short-term, you can go live, in a barn in upstate New York or in a string of adobe casitas in New Mexico. So I've done a lot of artist residencies. Also, for each of my books, I did these mega book tours. And so universities would put me up and then I'd crash on people's couches and then, yeah. So that was my life for my 20s and half of my 30s. And it eventually got to be 2008 really did a number on me and everybody. I mean, 2008 was brutal for us all, but it was very hard to be a freelance writer in that moment. And what was especially scary was that the majority of the money I was making was my books have earned shockingly little money. I mean, not shocking to me because I'm living it, but shocking to everyone I tell. So I will say, for the record, Around the Block, a book about 3 countries. I learned I learned how to speak Russian. I learned how to speak Chinese. I, started studying Spanish for this book. I got $10,000 book advance. Mexican enough, I got a $40,000 book advance. But that was when I was nomadic, and $40,000. It's not like you get a check for $40,000. Your agent takes 15% of it. It's divided up into multiple sets. So that's when I became nomadic, when I was writing that book. All the Agents and Saints, a book for which I conducted about 200 interviews. I got $5,000 for that book. Yeah. So no money. Not no money, $5,000. Yeah. So that is why I took really drastic measures of not living anywhere. And then, so the money I was making was from speaking. So I could, make $1,000 a speech, sometimes more. And so, but in 2008, when the stock market collapsed, it got incredibly difficult to do this. And so that is when I called my professor from UT Austin, who I love so much, Rosenthal Alves, and also Chuck Whitney. These two men were just the most extraordinary mentors and advisors. Chuck Whitney wrote me a letter of recommendation for everything I applied for like 2 decades until he died. 20 years of letters of recommendation for me. I mean, I'm so grateful to these two professors. They really did so much for me. And I called them. I'm like, what do I do? You know, and they both said the same thing: go to grad school. So I did. So that's what started me off. I went to the University of Iowa to the nonfiction writing program, and then I became a professor at at UNC Chapel Hill.
Did you hear about Sandra before you heard about Macondo?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I read
How was
Sandra
that?
when I was in high school. I found The House on Mango Street in high school. Yeah. I don't remember how I found it, but I found it. I read it. It was the first time I'd ever seen a Chicana in literature. It was extraordinary. And then when I went off to college, I then began reading her. And actually even demanding why she wasn't on a syllabus. I took an English class at UT Austin, and it was English literature, and it was all white men all throughout the entire semester. And at the very end, we read, I think, Adrienne Rich. And she was like the one non-male writer we read the whole semester. And I raised my hand and I'm like, but how about, all the rest of us? And how is there only one woman? And he said, oh, there's you might enjoy a book called The House on Mango Street. And it was really shocking. And that's again why I really dove deeply into my Chicano literary classes. Yeah. And I actually, should I go for it? Yeah. Okay. So actually, I have an amazing how I met Sandra story, which is I was an intern at the Washington Post in the summer of 1995. And I was so anxious to begin this internship because they really put their interns to work immediately, and you write stories for the Washington Post just from the get-go. And so I didn't get a story assignment my first day. The first day was like orientation and lunch, but they were like, okay, tomorrow you're going to write, and I was like, so the whole night I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to give me? I hope I can rise to the occasion. So I was feeling very anxious. And then my assignment editor came and he said, okay, here's your first story. You're going to go write about the new inductees for the John T. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Award. And I'm like, great. And I had no idea what this was. I pretended like I knew exactly what it was, but I had no idea what it was. This is before Google, right? So when it was done, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know what that is. So I went and I asked someone else, and they're like, oh, that's the Genius Grant. And I'm like, I'm going to interview geniuses? What? So I was thinking I'm going to interview a bunch of astrophysicists. So I am really freaked out now. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to talk about math. I'm going to have to talk about science. What am I going to ask? I don't even know. I should just leave now, So I was completely flipping out. And the MacArthur Foundation said, okay, we're going to fax you the winners and you pick one. And then we will call you, because it's the Washington Post. I guess they did this to probably the New York Times and the Washington Post. They're like, you pick the person you want to talk to. And then what will happen is we will then call that person and tell them they were awarded, and then immediately call you so you can be the first person to interview them. So I'm like, but I'm also like, I'm not going to know one astrophysicist to the next, so I'm just thinking that's all I'm going to have. So I will never forget, like I'm there, I'm panicking, I'm watching, the fax machine, purple ink, and I take it out, and the first name I see is Sandra Cisneros, and I about pass out. I mean, I could not believe that. I couldn't believe it. Like, A, that I knew who it was, and B, that it was one of us. Had just won a Genius Grant. Extraordinary. So I called Sandra. I immediately called the MacArthur Foundation. Sandra Cisneros. They're like, okay, we're going to call her right now. And then 3 minutes later, they're like, okay, call her. And so I did. So then I had her number. Woo, that was exciting. It's like, call her. And I'm in DC. She's in San Antonio. And she had she had been told that the MacArthur Foundation was about to call her, and she was freaking out. So she started a bubble bath. And by the time we were talking, I was intending to act very professionally, but as soon as I heard her voice, which I never heard her voice before, and, her voice is just this like songbird, beautiful, melodic voice. And it just elated me. And I forgot I was a journalist. And I just started literally jumping up and down. I was like, you won. And she's like, I won. I mean, we were just like having a moment of celebrating. And then she immediately was like, well, tell me about you, who are you? And I said, well, I'm from Corpus Christi. You're from Corpus Christi? Well, Mija, you need to remember, always tell our community stories. And so I interviewed her very briefly, but she was really focused more on interviewing me. And then suddenly she remembered that she had started the bath, and the bubbles were spilling up. So she's like, I gotta go. So she hung up. And anyway, that was my interview with Sandra Cisneros. That's how we met. Yeah, wild. Yeah. And then I didn't meet her for 7 or 8 years after Around the Block was out, and 100 Places Every Woman Should Go, which is a guidebook I wrote. So I met her right after that book came out. So that would be 2007. So, and that is when the anthology Hecho en Texas came out. And this was when I was nomadic, and I bribed someone to drive me all the way to San Marcos to go to the reading. And because I knew Sandra would be there, and I had to meet Sandra. And I was very strategic. I wanted to give her a copy of, these books. And so I needed to like catch her attention. So I really thought carefully about what I was going to wear. And I had these jeans that had the Calavera de la Catrina embroidered on them. And so I wore those, and big hoop earrings and cowboy boots, and I did my best to imitate how she dresses. And sure enough, she saw me in the book line. She's like, I want those jeans. And so she got in my book and she scribbled her number so I could send her. And I was like, actually, I already know your number, Sandra. I had kept it from the Washington Post for 7 years. Anyway, so then that began this wonderful period of a couple of years where I was in San Antonio a lot because my sister lives here, and I was nomadic. So this was a free place for me to crash. And whenever I would see Sandra at a literary event, she would invite me out to dinner afterward, which at that moment in my life when I had this career I was so excited about. I was living my dream. I was an author. And I also had very little financially to show for it. And I was, living on people's couches, literally, at that moment. But I could go have tacos with Sandra Cisneros. So I'm like, that to me was success. Anyway, so Sandra asked me why I had never applied to Macondo. And the reason I hadn't applied to Macondo was because I did not feel I was Mexican enough to be there. I felt that I believe it is very important to have spaces for communities of color to come together and work in solidarity and support one another in ways that I feel I didn't have the consciousness to do. So that is why I did not apply. She, however, urged me to do so, and so I did. So that is why, so I came into Macondo later on in 2009 was my first Macondo.
What do you remember from that experience?
Yeah. So I remember arriving very late. I arrived about 45 minutes into the grand welcome, which was an important detail because this was like the end of my nomadism. I'd been nomadic completely for 3 years prior to arriving to Macondo. And this was in 2009. So 2008, the economy had collapsed. And I realized that literally all of the contracts that I had, I was not living from my book per se because I was making very little money from my books, but I was living from speaking gigs related to my books. Okay, so
it was the first time you came to Macondo.
First time Macondo. Yes. Okay, so this was right before I ended my life as a nomad. So this was a big moment for me because all of my 20s and 30s, I had worked toward this dream of being a travel writer and doing this work that I deeply believed in. And I had to face the economic reality that it was not working out. I was not able to I wasn't even able to pay rent. I didn't make enough to pay rent. So something needed to happen. And all my advisor says, go to grad school. So I did a big application period. I applied to like a dozen schools, and I got a free ride at University of Iowa, which is the birthplace of the MFA. And that's why I went. I went because of the funding. I would have preferred to go to the University of Arizona because that's closer to the border. And I really wanted to go to University of Arizona, but they did not give me anywhere near the amount of funding that Iowa did. So I just made the very pragmatic choice. Anyway, and I was anxious about Iowa because I knew of Sandra's very difficult experience at Iowa. And I arrived late and so everyone had already gone around and introduced themselves. And Sandra was then telling the story of how Macondo came to be. And so I walked in literally as she was talking about how terrible her experience was at Iowa. And I'm like literally 2 weeks away from going to Iowa. So I walk in. So it was the timing of it was kind of comical. You know, she's like, Iowa, just talking about how hard of an experience it was. And then she's like, oh, Stephanie, introduce yourself. And I'm like, hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm 2 weeks away from going to Iowa. And she said, oh, we all need to, encircle her with love and light so she can go through this. And yeah, so anyway, that's my first memory of Iowa. I mean, of Macondo, yes.
So did you have any memorable experiences at that Macondo?
I did, yes. So it was a difficult experience for me. I had actually never been workshopped before. I had never taken a creative writing class before. So this was all very new, and I was about to go into an MFA program. So I'm really grateful to have had that experience. The piece that I brought was the first piece in probably a decade that I had written that was not a piece of literary activism. It was a piece I had just started thinking about silence as a subject matter. And I had come up with this idea by going to Leb Shemaya, which is a Catholic house of prayer. It's located in Sarita, Texas, about 90 miles north of the border. And in order to be there, so again, this is my nomadic period of my life, so I'm looking for any cheap place to crash. And at that time, you could stay there for $15 a day, and they fed you too. And so it's this beautiful, beautiful place, and it's adjacent to the King Ranch. So it's at the Kennedy Ranch. So it's right, familial wise, like it's ancestral land for me. They have a library of 30,000 volumes, largely about Catholicism and mysticism and things that are very important, I think, to, I was raised Catholic, and I had always been curious in my religion, and particularly this ties with Mexican identity. And anyway, this was like the perfect place for me to be. But you had to take a vow of silence to be there. And so that is what got me thinking about silence. And I decided to write a book. This was going to be my thesis project at Iowa. I was going to write a book called The Book of Silence. And it was going to be divided into 3 sections: silence that's chosen, silence that's imposed, and silence that's eternal. And so I was going to write about solitary confinement, Zen Buddhism, deafness, just all these different aspects of silence. Anyway, that was my project. And so I handed in the first piece, which was just about being there. And so it was a rough draft, and it was a very intense experience being workshopped. And one person said that it was shallow, which was very, very helpful because I needed to go a lot deeper. Unfortunately, that word shallow triggered an emotional response to me because one very hard thing that happened when I was a student at UT Austin is when I mentioned that I applied for like every grant, scholarship, fellowship that had a plane ticket attached to it. I got one of the ones that I advanced quite far in was the Rhodes Scholarship. And so a panel of UT professors began helping me prepare for that. And it was really a challenge to do that level of interviewing, never having done anything remotely like this in my life. And I'm the first person in my family, the first generation to go to college. And, so just even being at UT is like a challenge, right? And much less like applying for the Rhodes. And I'd never been interviewed formally for anything except working at the Gap, so it was just, all of this was just difficult, right? So I just remember this one professor who was really very intense with these practice sessions was asking me a question that I don't even remember what the question was, but I was not answering it to his satisfaction. And at one point he just kept on saying, okay, try that again. And so I would do it again. Okay, try that again. Okay, I would do it again. Try it again. And then the fourth, fifth time he said, try it again. This time try to sound like you have a core. And that really shook me in a way that made me lose confidence. And I did terribly at the Rhodes interview. Like I really did not do well. And one of the reasons why I believe I didn't do well was because, again, this committee, and I appreciate very much, these are faculty members that have so much going on and they are taking time out of the day to try to help me. So I really don't want to disrespect them. But the things that, as I was hearing it in that moment, they were saying like, you need to do something with your hair. Your hair's too big and crazy. You need to tie it back. You need to like get a French braid. You need to like do your nails. You need to do like the way you're dressing is not appropriate. Your big hoop earrings are not going to work. Like they were just, wanting me to be this like prim proper, someone I was not. And so, when I did the interview as they had instructed me, I really did not know who I was in that interview, and I did a terrible job. Then when I went for the loose scholarship, I'm like, I'm wearing my hair out, I'm wearing my jewelry, I'm like, game on, and they were also like, they kept on telling me when they would ask me a question, I was always like leaning forward. They're like, go back, and they were even with my posture. And so the loose interview, I'm like, telling stories. Anyway, I got that one, right? So then I'm like, I will never change myself for an interview again. But anyway, something about someone saying like literally, you sound so shallow here was just like, it just triggered that. So I think I'm just trying to explain, like, I don't think people were saying things to hurt me. It's just the way that it unfortunately hit me in that moment. But then the workshop leader looked at me and said, why are you here, Stephanie? And I did not know how to answer that. And then she repeated it. And then another person in the workshop said the same thing. Yeah, Stephanie, why are you here? And I said, Sandra invited me here. I didn't know, I just didn't understand how to answer that question. But then they said it again. And it was, that then triggered in me the what are you question, and made me feel like I wasn't Mexican enough to be in this space. Which who knows what they meant. And I didn't either, but so I think that it was a hard experience because just as a luck of the draw, the two things that I was told were like two literal big insecurities of my life. And that was very, very, very difficult for me. So yeah, a lot of tears ensued. And then I went up to Iowa, which was also a difficult experience because I had already, it was difficult to go to school for something that I had been doing in the field for 15 years and had also been teaching myself. So I was not happy about going to get an MFA, but it was not, just within a couple of weeks of being in Iowa, I realized that I absolutely needed to be in an MFA program because I did not have the reading foundation to teach, which was the reason I wanted to go to grad school, so I could then become a professor, so I could have a bit of stability, economic stability in my life. And I absolutely had to learn about the genre of creative nonfiction. I didn't even know who Montaigne was. I hadn't read any of the classics in the genre. So I spent 3 years doing that. And I feel like I'm a really good teacher now because I had that training at Iowa. So Macondo, my initial experience with Macondo was very difficult for me. But I think it just prepared me for the sort of existential reconstruction that happens to every MFA student.
Why did you return?
Yeah, so I was not eager to return after that experience. And I did not return until I was invited to be faculty, which happened in 2018. And that was an extraordinary experience. So it's interesting. Macondo for me, the most difficult thing that's happened in my literary life, just in a very personal level, happened at Macondo, and also the best teaching experience of my career, I would say, happened to me at Macondo as well. It was magical. I loved my students. We had a really beautiful connection and really got great work done. It's also the Macondo where I met Rihanna Grande, who is now a really meaningful friend. I'd met Allison Hedgecock before, but we got really close. Natalia Trevino is actually my sister's best friend, but it's also, which is really, random and special. But Natalia and I got to, know one another outside of my sister. And now Natalia is a really meaningful person in my life. Alex Espinosa, someone who I admired so much, I got to meet, work with him. It was such a special experience this, in 2018. And also, I guess that's what I have to say about that. So 2018 was a really beautiful experience, and I continued working with my students. I wrote many letters of recommendation, helped them get where they wanted to go in life, and so that was very meaningful as well. And also why I came back is just I believe in Macondo. I believe in this space. I think it's a really important space. I think that what happened to me is a rare experience. I think that most people come and really find the support they're looking for. And that's what it's for. It's to help people that haven't had that type of support before.
What makes Macondo different from other workshops?
Well, I think the fact that it was founded by Chicana, that's never been done before. The fact that it has managed to stay consistently running, I think all but a couple of years, for 30 years, is really extraordinary and very unusual in a workshop. The fact that a lot of people both take classes and teach classes is very unusual. I don't think that happens really at all in other. It's like you will maybe like you teach you're a student, and then you publish a book, then it does well, then you come back as a teacher, but you would never then return as a student ever. Like I don't think at any of the other writing workshops. But the fact that Ariana Grande, who's really one of our major writers, like still will come back and take a class now and then, like that's extraordinary and doesn't happen in other places. So I think that this understanding that we are both writers and students, and then the fact that there's this whole like Chuparosa, that comes in, all the community events that we do, the fact that it's largely a place for Chicanos, that's Chicanx writers, is extraordinary. The emphasis on social justice is extraordinary, especially in this particular moment in time. The fact that it's in San Antonio, like literally every aspect of it is so innovative. And so that's why it is sort of this existential literary homeland for us all. Yeah.
Did you make any friendships from the first time that you were here, or was it really just the second time?
I definitely met people, and I became a mentor to someone from the first year. Someone, I helped her get her first publication, and I helped her write another essay that got a big award. So I feel really good about that.
You came as a student, then you came as a teacher.
Yes.
Okay, and this time you're coming as
a chuparosa. Yes. Yes.
What project are you working on, if you want to share, or maybe you're not?
Well, I just published my 6th book, Art Above Everything, and I'm now on a 30-city book tour. And when I learned this was the 30th anniversary, I thought that's very significant. Also, one of the chapters in Art Above Everything is actually about Sandra. So Sandra is someone who I have studied quite extensively in preparation for my interview with her. Actually, I interviewed her over the course of probably 13, 14 hours. Actually, I went to spend a weekend with her in San Miguel de Allende when I was working on this book. So just knowing how incredibly important this legacy is to her is something I take very seriously. Macondo is something I deeply want to support. I've actually sent students of mine here. I've sent, colleagues of mine here. Absolutely, I wanted to be here. Yeah.
How did Macondo affect your writing after the first time that you were here? Because there was a very uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
How did that impact, for better or for worse, what you did subsequently?
Yeah. Well, it definitely, being told that it was shallow really psychologically impacted me quite greatly. And I ultimately abandoned the Book of Silence. So that's actually the only book project I've ever stopped working on. And I ended up writing All the Agents and Saints instead. Yeah.
Do you have a writing mentor?
I do not. I have never had. No one has ever really helped me with my writing, I would say. With the exception of once at the Washington Post, there was a reporter named Martha Sherrill who sat me down and said, "Watch me edit your story." And that is how I learned the art of precision and concise sentences and punchy sentences. She showed me how to flip a sentence to make the verbs dynamic. And it was half an hour. I left a changed writer, and I was so deeply grateful for it. At Iowa, I was introduced to writers whose books, by virtue of reading them, made me a better writer. But I'm here to say that I have never had an editor at a publishing house or a magazine, with the exception of VQR magazine did give me a good edit that I feel I benefited from as a writer. So maybe those 2 experiences. But beyond that, I've been largely self-taught and have edited my own books. And I've never had a successful writing back and forth with anyone. I do have a couple of people who I deeply trust to talk about just the larger business of being a writer, and I'm really grateful to have those. I have a couple of actually internet, they both really took root during COVID, but even pre-COVID, of us gathering together on Zoom. These are writers that are all over the country. One is affiliated with Iowa. The other is a lot of Latina writers, some of whom are Macondistas, but a number who are not. And we get together and just talk about the larger business and ethics and, aspects of being a writer. But just as I assume you mean, a writing mentor sits down and talks to me about my work, I've never had anyone.
What about, do you mentor other writers?
I am the mentor to dozens and dozens and dozens of writers. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you manage?
Macondistas, as well as, I mentor a lot of people because I'm a professor also at UNC Chapel Hill, and every semester I am the professor to minimum 35 to 40 And a lot of them hold on to me moving through. So I have mentored probably 40 people to get an MFA. Every single person I have mentored has gotten into an MFA program. I'm really proud of that. And I'm starting to get grand books now. My students from UNC who go on and publish books. And that's very meaningful to me because I don't have flesh and blood children myself. I'll never have actual grandchildren. So these grand books really mean a lot to me. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest publishing challenges for Latinx writers?
There is very little that's not a challenge, actually. There was a really small period of time in the aughts when like Renee Alegría had Rayo Press with HarperCollins, and Johanna Castillo had Atria with Simon & Schuster. So there was like a hot minute in the aughts when there were 2 Latino editors that we could pitch, and a couple of agents. And that's when I received the one advance that was not like a tragically small number. So that's when I got my $40,000 book advance. And that was a brief moment. And then there was also a very, very brief moment when American Dirt was published, and a movement called Dignidad Literaria came from that. And some writers went to, took Flatiron to task for publishing that book, that Flatiron did go out and give some Latino writers like a pretty powerful advance. Yes, so those are 2 moments that I can point to, 2 moments out of all of this history, yeah.
How do you sustain your writing practice?
How do I sustain my writing practice? It is the people I write about have lived such incredibly challenging lives that I feel so honored to be invited into their home. I am so privileged to be the recipient of their story. That is all the motivation I need to keep moving forward, and the determination I need to keep moving forward.
Is there a piece of writing advice or an exercise that you do that has stayed with you, that somebody told you to try?
Not that someone told me to try. I think that the practice that I began on a cot in Moscow in 1996, my first time abroad, it has served me the best. Just really attempting to be deeply rooted in the present. Carolyn Forche, the poet, once said, writers should live in a state of meditative expectancy. And that is the position in which I attempt to live my life, being keenly awake and aware of what's happening around me. And I do that by going through the senses and asking every question possible.
What advice would you give to the next generation of writers?
I would first acknowledge that as incredibly difficult as it was for me in my generation, it is now even harder. And also, stories are what make us human. And devoting one's life to the pursuit of story will lead you to a very rich and meaningful life. So it is always worth it. It is always enough. To answer my own question, is art enough? For me, and for the 100 women I spent the last 10 years of my life traveling around the world to meet and find, art is always enough. The question is, are you? So that's the deep internal work where pursuing this will take you.
is there anything that we haven't covered or that you'd like to say?
I feel that we've covered quite a wide range. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that interview.
Yes,
Thank you
yeah.
for sharing all your enoughness with
Yeah.
us. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.